I would like to add a personal note to my class on Parshat Balak. Today is the 13th day of Tammuz. It's a Yom Geulah, it's a day of redemption. It's a day in which the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was freed from Soviet incarceration, from prison, where he'd been sentenced to death. The reason why he had been sentenced to death was because he had been engaged in spreading Yiddishkeit, Judaism in Russia, in opposition to the desire of the Soviet regime. He had sent his chassidim, his followers, to build mikvaot, mikvahs, to establish chadorim for young children, to build yeshivas, and generally speaking, to do whatever was possible to enhance Jewish life, at a time when Jewish life was illegal and outlawed. As a result of this, he was sentenced to death, and it was only as a result of the intercession of leaders around the world, including the American president at the time, Reform Rabbi Leo Beck, and of course the help of Almighty God, that the previous Rebbe was freed. When he came out of prison, he understood that his liberation was not a personal thing for himself, but he dedicated himself, although disallowed from remaining in Russia, to spreading Yiddishkeit around the entire world. And so he continued to build yeshivas in America, the United States, and Australia. And indeed, one can attribute the entire Baal Tshuva movement, the entire movement of return to Judaism, to the work which the previous Rebbe did, commencing on his release in 1927. And therefore, it's not only a day of redemption for himself, but it had a marked effect on Jewry generally. However, not everyone was so lucky. Amongst those who died, who were executed in the process of spreading Yiddishkeit in Soviet Russia, were my wife's two grandfathers. Her mother's father, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Shagalov, and the father's father, Rabbi Elchanan Dave Morozov. They had dedicated their lives to fulfilling the mission of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, of spreading Yiddishkeit in Russia. They would circumcise children. They would establish places of learning for children. They would live lives of holiness, and they would encourage others to live lives of holiness too. Finally, the Soviets caught up with them. And in 1938, they were both executed. And yet in our family, very little is said about their deaths. They died al Kiddush Hashem, in the sanctification of God's name. But that is not what is glorified. What is glorified is the sacrifice which they had during their lifetimes. The fact that they did go and circumcise children. The fact that they did establish chadorim. The fact that they did encourage holiness both in their own lives, the lives of their families, and the lives of everyone around them. What is discussed in our family is the holiness of our lives, not the glorification of their deaths. Because that is what Judaism was all about. It's all about living good, holy lives. Should death come, death comes. But it's not that which is glorified. So too, when it comes the 13th day of Tammuz, let's rededicate ourselves to living holy lives. Bilam may say he wants to live a good death, but we say, Kiddush HaChaim, let's give and sanctify good lives. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom.